There is a strange paradox in business. A product can be an icon in one place and become a stranger in another. Pepsi Max is the clearest example. In Norway, Pepsi Max once beat Coca-Cola. In the UK, it ranks among the most popular sodas. But in the US, it doesn't even reach 1% market share. What on earth happened? How can a product become the default in Europe, but be almost ignored by Americans? This is not just a story about taste. Not just because Americans prefer Coke, and certainly not because of poor product quality. This is a story about poorly timed strategy, about management decisions that turned a global advantage into a domestic blunder, and about how a name, just a name, can determine the fate of billions. In this video, we will peel back each layer of that paradox, and you will realize failure sometimes does not come from the market, but from within the company itself. Let's get started. If we consider the soda market as a casino, then in the early 90s, Pepsi quietly placed a very large bet in Europe. And the interesting thing is, they won. But how did they win? First, let's talk about the groundbreaking formula, the secret weapon in the lab that helped them achieve resounding success. In 1993, Pepsi launched Pepsi Max in Europe with a seemingly dry chemical trick that turned out to be extremely effective: the combination of aspartame and ACE-K. Aspartame gives a gradually sweet sensation, like a slow opening piece of music. ACE-K, on the other hand, hits the taste buds directly, creating a quick explosion, but it can leave a slightly metallic aftertaste. When mixed in the right proportions, these two create what R&D people call burst and sustain. A burst followed by a lingering effect, making the drinker feel something close to real sugary soda. If diet soda was previously like an emotionless cover, then Max is the remix version that makes people want to listen again. So, if the flavor is already close to the original, why doesn't Pepsi immediately capitalize on this victory in the USS? Pepsi understands something that many brands often overlook. Customers don't just drink the flavor, they drink the label too. At that time, the word diet in many markets carried a social connotation. It sounded restrictive, serious, and in the mindset of young men, it was sometimes associated with an image that didn't align with their ego. So Pepsi made a bold move to change their fate. They didn't sell Diet Pepsi. They sold Max, a word that evokes maximum, strong, cool, like a neon light in the night street. One word redirected the entire segment. Positioning for young men without having to say it out loud. And the market responded just like a successful experiment. In many places, Pepsi Max became the default choice, to the extent that there are reports of some countries seeing Max more often than regular Pepsi. Imagine, you walk into the supermarket, the soda aisle looks like a parking lot, and the car parked to capacity is none other than Max. This raises a significant paradox for the entire story. The product is not wrong, it has even been proven successful. So what makes it become a stranger when it sets foot in America? In your opinion, which factor weighs more? The formula, the name, or market bias? Let's try a hypothesis of yours. And right after this, we will step into the fateful turning point. When America opened its doors, Pepsi did not bring the winning weapons to the battlefield, but chose a different path. If Europe is a successful laboratory, then America resembles a door locked for a decade. And when that door opened, Pepsi did not step in the way everyone thought. In the late 1980s, ACE-K, a key ingredient that contributed to the taste advantage of Pepsi Max, faced controversy in the USS. While Europe had allowed its use, in the US, the approval process dragged on for nearly 10 years. Imagine you are leading in a race. but you are asked to stand still at the starting line for another lap. When you get to run, your opponent has already studied the track. From 1988 to 1998, Pepsi saw its product gain traction in Europe, but in the US, they were forced to wait. And in business, 10 years is not a pause, it is a generation of consumers. But the most curious thing is, when the final legal barrier was removed, Pepsi did not bring its proven weapon to the US. In 1998, when the ingredient was approved, everything seemed ready for Pepsi Max to enter the US market. Instead, Pepsi introduced another product, Pepsi One. The formula is similar, but the name is completely different. No Max, no inheriting the successful image from Europe. As if a championship team decided to take the field with new jerseys, a new logo, and a different strategy. Initially, Pepsi One was not an immediate failure. In 1999, the product reached approximately 83.7 million cases, a figure that sounds like an entire city consuming in a year. But just after 5 years, this number dropped to about 19. 2 million barrels, equivalent to a decrease of nearly 77%. Imagine a 100 story building with only 23 floors still lit. What happened? Could it be that American consumers don't understand what Pepsi One is? Or have they missed the emotional connection that Max once created in Europe? Or is this an internal strategic choice creating new products instead of continuing with the successful ones? But this is just the beginning of the brand's tangled web, because after Pepsi One, a series of other names continued to appear and the story began to become more complicated than its flavor. If in Europe, Pepsi Max resembles a ship sailing straight, stable, and with a clear destination, then upon arriving in America, that ship was dismantled into many pieces, each piece going in a different direction. And the result is, consumers no longer see a brand, they only see a maze. In the US, instead of stepping in with a winning name, Pepsi continuously releases versions that sound similar but differ in messaging. Pepsi Max, Pepsi One, Diet, Pepsi Max, and then Pepsi Zero Sugar. Imagine you walk into a supermarket and see 4 similar keys on the shelf, each labeled Unlock Happiness, but none of them specify which door they unlock. The buyer stands there, hesitating for a few seconds, and in those few seconds, they choose the more familiar option. It can be seen that a strong brand is like a bright, clear sign. A confusing brand is like a flashing billboard. The more it blinks, the more people turn away. The noteworthy thing is that this confusion is not just in the name. It creates a lingering question in the customer's mind. So, which product is the flagship? When even the followers of the story find it hard to connect the dots, you can guess the level of confusion among the general consumers. In your opinion, if you were a customer standing in front of that shelf, would you choose the familiar one or the one that sounds new but is hard to understand? And then Pepsi took the complexity to another level with Diet Pepsi Max. It combined diet implying control, lightness with max implying strength, maximum, and it was marketed as a kind of alertness thanks to 69 milligrams of caffeine, almost double some previous versions, and with added ginseng. Do you see the problem? It's like a car that has a fuel efficiency label but also displays a speed racing sign. Users don't know what to expect, and when expectations conflict, trust falls rapidly. Perhaps Pepsi didn't lose because it wasn't good, but because they forced customers to solve a puzzle before drinking. After dissecting the strategy, a bigger question arises. How do consumers actually perceive this? And interestingly, in the hundreds of comments, there are layers of emotions hidden deeper than the market share data. In Europe, many people do not call it the sugar-free version. They simply call it Pepsi. There are comments like, "Here, Pepsi Max is the default. I've never heard of Pepsi Zero." At first glance, it seems like just a linguistic habit, but deeper than that, it is the market identity. When a product becomes the default choice, It's like a song played every day on the radio. You no longer think about it, you just live with it. So when they heard the news that Max failed in the US, their first reaction was surprise. Even hard to believe, as if a domestic champion team couldn't even make it past the qualifiers elsewhere. Meanwhile, in the US, the word diet is not simply a description of ingredients, it carries emotions. Some people avoid diet soda, yet are still willing to drink light beer. The ingredients may be similar in terms of reduction logic, but the psychological response is different. This shows that people do not consume based on ingredient lists. They consume based on associations. If Max evokes strength, then diet easily evokes restraint. And when Pepsi combines both elements into one product, Diet Pepsi Max, consumers receive a contradictory message. Like a sign that says both full power and low impact, the brain has to stop to process it. And in a crowded market, just 1 second of hesitation is enough to lose a customer. There is a very noteworthy comment. Managers don't get promoted by continuing what works. That's not a complaint, but a strategic perspective. Behind that lies the suspicion that the decision to replace Max with Pepsi One did not come from the market, but from internal structure. Failure sometimes does not come from the product or the buyer, but from the need to create a personal mark within the company. And when the management ego collides with brand consistency, it is the consumers who first feel the rupture. In the next section, we will see what happens when Coke Zero, a competitor, steps in with a message as sharp as a knife, and the American market immediately chooses clarity over confusion. If Pepsi's story in the US is a series of complex turns, then in 2005, Coca-Cola stepped in, like a boxer who doesn't throw too many punches, but hits every weak spot. In 2005, Coca-Cola introduced Coke Zero, not Diet Coke 2, not Coke Max Energy Light, just Coke Zero. Within a year, this product captured nearly 1% of the entire US soda market. Sounds small? Imagine the entire industry as a 100,000-seat stadium, and in just 12 months, Coke Zero has taken nearly 1,000 seats. With an industry that has been saturated for decades, that is an incredible pace. Later, Coke Zero reached about 4% market share, equivalent to billions of cans each year. While Pepsi is still struggling with Pepsi One and Diet Pepsi Max, Coke Zero quietly built a foundation as solid as concrete. The noteworthy thing is, Coke is not trying to reinvent the wheel. They only refined one thing, removed the sugar, kept the image. Coca-Cola understands a seemingly simple but difficult rule. Keep the brand central, rather than fragmenting it. The name Coke Zero, direct, memorable, uncontroversial, positioning, tastes like Coke, no sugar, message. No energy mix, no added ginseng, no trying to do 2 roles at once. If Pepsi is like a control panel with too many buttons, then Coke Zero has just one switch. On and drink. In a noisy market, what wins is not the product that speaks the most, but the product that speaks the clearest. The question arises, is it possible that American consumers are not rejecting Pepsi because of its taste, but because they are not sure what they are being invited to? And when the competitor has dominated the mind with clarity, does Pepsi still have a chance to turn things around? We will delve into their belated repositioning efforts in the next section. After many years of cycling between Pepsi One, Diet Pepsi Max, and half-hearted experiments, Pepsi has finally done what they should have done from the beginning. Return to simplicity. But the price of this simplicity was nearly 20 years of market share. Around the late 2000s, Pepsi began removing the word diet from some of its strategic product lines. This is not just a rebranding, but the removal of a layer of prejudice. In the US, diet is no longer simply about being low in sugar. It feels outdated, even diminishing its appeal to the younger customer segment. When Pepsi removed this word, they were removing an invisible barrier between the product and the consumer, but just changing the name isn't enough. In the mid-2010s, Pepsi officially launched the name Pepsi Zero Sugar to the market, almost simultaneously with Coke Zero Sugar. No more one, no more Max with diet. Only one clear message remains: Pepsi, no sugar. This is the first time Pepsi has truly built consistency in the US. Similar to how they did with Max in Europe. They no longer try to create a secondary identity, but place the zero sugar product alongside regular Pepsi, like two parallel versions of the same icon. Pepsi has finally stopped experimenting and started consolidating. A significant turning point came in 2023. Pepsi Zero continues to be adjusted. Remove ginseng, reduce the energy boosting factor, adjust the sweetener ratio to make the taste closer to regular Pepsi. If previously the product resembled a car hybrid between a sedan and a sports car, now Pepsi has decided to do just one thing: become Pepsi, but without sugar. According to the company's announcement, Pepsi Zero has recorded a growth rate nearly double that of the zero sugar segment at certain recent times. If we consider the segment as a running train, then Pepsi Zero is starting to accelerate faster than the overall pace. But the big question remains: is this a true comeback, or just a narrowing of the gap? In your opinion, if Pepsi had brought Max to the US from the beginning instead of creating Pepsi One, would the situation have been different? And before concluding, we need to look at the bigger picture. This issue is not just about a sickle product, but about how each market operates as its own separate world. At this point, the story is no longer just about whether Pepsi is right or wrong. The deeper issue lies in a reality that many global corporations often underestimate. The market does not operate according to a common value system. Pepsi Max's success in Europe is not because Europeans prefer the taste more. It succeeded because it aligned with the way they interpret the product. In many European countries, Max evokes strength, maximum, and performance. The sugar-free product does not heavily emphasize the aspect of abstinence. Pepsi Max has become the main choice, even replacing regular Pepsi in some places. And in the US, Max is easily confusing. Maximum of what? Caffeine? Sweetness? Diet is associated with an outdated image, reducing its appeal among younger groups. Pepsi Classic remains the central standard. Imagine two markets as two different control panels. The same button, but each place is programmed to react differently. Pressing Max in Europe turns on the green light. Pressing Max in the US might just make people stop and think. In addition, the issue of collective psychology is also a decisive factor. In Europe, the dominance of Pepsi Max on the shelves is like a habit that has been set as default. In the US, the market structure has revolved around Coke and Pepsi Classic for decades. Changing the default there is like asking users to switch operating systems. Not impossible, but time-consuming and requiring an extremely clear message. In your opinion, if the same product is placed in two different cultural contexts, which factor is more decisive? Taste or brand trust? And when we look at this panorama, we will see Pepsi's failure in the US was not just a tactical mistake, but a global strategic lesson on understanding the market. At this point, we need to take a step back, because perhaps the question of why Pepsi failed in the US, not big enough. The more appropriate question might be, does Pepsi really need to win there anymore? Currently, PepsiCo generates about 80 billion USD in revenue each year. If we put it into perspective, that is equivalent to the revenue of a mega city consuming products every day. But the noteworthy aspect lies in the internal structure. Beverages account for only about 42% of the revenue. The rest comes from the food sector, especially Frito-Lay. In other words, if PepsiCo is a giant ship, then soda is no longer the only engine. This ship is being pulled by many parallel engines, and snacks are the most profitable engine. While the soda industry in the US has been growing slowly, even declining for many years, the snack segment has been steadily growing. Lay's, Doritos, Cheetos. These brands do not participate in the cola wars. They occupy the shelves in a different way, steadily and persistently. PepsiCo is not just a soft drink company. They are an integrated food and beverage corporation. Therefore, if they have to allocate resources, the question arises, will they focus all their efforts on a fiercely competitive cola market, or invest in a sector with higher margins and less volatility? Perhaps Pepsi no longer sees the cola war as a vital front. Instead of trying to gain a few more market share points against Coke, they are optimizing a broader portfolio. It's not that they are losing, they are playing a different game. In your opinion, if you were the CEO, would you fight to the end in a slowing segment or reallocate resources to a stronger growth area? And from here, we can conclude the story with a bigger question. Is the failure of a product truly the failure of the entire company? Pepsi Max did not fail because of its formula. It didn't fail because consumers didn't like the taste. And perhaps it didn't completely fail due to a wrong strategy either. This story shows something greater. The same product, but two markets, can operate like two different universes. The same formula, but the way the story is told determines the fate. And the same failure, but at the corporate level, it might just be a reallocation of resources. So, in your opinion, if Pepsi had brought Pepsi Max to the US from the beginning, would the situation have changed? Or would Coke Zero still win thanks to its simplicity and consistency? And more importantly, in global business, which factor is more decisive? Product, brand, or market culture? Please leave your opinion in the comments section. I would love to read different perspectives from you. If you enjoy strategic analyses like this behind-the-scenes dissection, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case studies on the fateful turns of global corporations. Note: the content in the video is analytical, compiled from various public sources and personal perspectives, and does not represent any organization. The figures may change over time and according to business reports. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next business story.